Though no sunlight shone within the deep caverns of Rekos, the distant murmur of voices and a light breeze through the fortress told Rachel that it was morning. She had slept soundly that night after leaving her companions to their conspiring. When she had last seen Justine, she was preparing to sneak into the Dark Lord's chamber to steal Marcus's battle-axe back. Rachel wanted no part in this plot, despite her fondness of Marcus and her sympathy for the injury he sustained. Devane was going to be her husband, and she needed to prove that she would support the decisions he made if he was going to help save the kingdom of Kennedag for her. Rising from her bed well rested, Rachel drifted to the dressing table in the corner of the room, which supported a large round looking-glass. Her reflection looked back at her bravely as she began to bind her hair back neatly. Each strand of hair twirled tightly around the neighboring strand, and then pushed another piece out as the coil wound tighter. Rachel sighed, seeing the mess of her hair she was making, wishing silently that Justine would suddenly reappear to help her. But she assumed that the gypsy girl was still sleeping after aiding in the plot last night, having no idea that Justine had attempted to betray her, and that Devane had killed her for that reason. Rachel took her time drawing back her hair with her hands, winding it into a roll behind her head as neatly as her clumsy hands could. When she had finished, her tranquil green eyes lowered to the dressing table to search for some form of clasp or pin to hold her hair in place. But when her eyes glanced back up into the dim, somewhat dusty reflection in the glass, she let out a gasp. Her hands fell away from her hair, and the mangled coil dropped down her shoulders and unfurled, as Rachel stared up in shock into the pair of bottomless black eyes meeting hers in the reflection. Behind her, the door to her chamber was gaping open, and the Dark Lord was looming only a few steps behind her, with a bundled object clutched between his hands. Rachel spun about in her seat at the dressing table frantically, and looked up at him with wide, panicked eyes. "What are you doing in here?" There was a twinkle of amusement in his eyes, and he did not apologize for startling her, but instead he lowered his gaze to the bundled object in his hands. It was wrapped in a cloth, so she could not tell what it was, but the way he gingerly held it suggested that it was something fragile. Her confused eyes drifted from his face to the object, back to him, trying to determine what he was thinking, or what he might be holding. Seeing her hesitation, he took the liberty of unfolding it himself. The cloth slid to the floor in a discarded heap as he revealed a gleaming silver crown beneath. It was the smoothest, brightest silver she had ever seen, and each of the elegant ridges were imprinted with intricate patterns of roses and twisting vines. Rachel stared in wonder at the magnificent piece of craftsmanship, and almost forgot how closely Devane was watching her. He saw her lovely face illuminate with wonder at the sight of this extravagant adornment, and inwardly he smiled smugly to himself. She had no idea what it was he was holding. True, it was beautiful, but it held a far more sinister significance. The crown he held had been forged from the metal of the goddess's battle-axe. He had sent Salvador to the surface with the axe to bring it to a nearby gypsy tribe, one in particular who were dedicated to metalworking and forging. It had been a simple task for the tribe to melt down the blade and form it into the shape of a crown, but the detail and design on it had been Devane's own doing. With pride, he offered it out in his hands to the princess. "Take it," he said softly, almost laughing as he held it out to her. She looked surprised, but did as he said, taking the somewhat heavy silver crown from his hands and turning to admire it. "It's beautiful." "I hoped you would like it. I also have one for myself. They will be ours to wear together as we rule over our new kingdom when Kennedag is rebuilt. Ours to wear tomorrow at our wedding." Rachel's eyes widened in alarm. "Our wedding? Tomorrow? Why so soon?" A solemn expression appeared on his face as he said, "Your people, even now, are still under attack. The sooner we are married, the sooner I can fulfill my promise to put an end to that. I am anxious to take on that responsibility." "Is that surprising to you?" he asked, lifting an eyebrow to question her hesitation. She shook her head. No, I'm glad that you are eager to keep your word. I do not doubt that you will do so, as you have said. I suppose I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. I hope I have not offended you. I'm just pleased." He nodded gently, his grin returning as he said, "The preparations are already in order for the ceremony, and some of the women from my tribes on the surface have agreed to help you prepare tomorrow. Until then, you needn't worry about a thing. Everything is going exactly how I have planned," he finished. That last sentence made Rachel feel uneasy, as though he had threatened her in some way. But he smiled softly and bowed his head, excusing himself to continue with his preparations. A moment later, Rachel was alone again, feeling overwhelmed and confused. But her eyes lowered to the silver crown still resting between her hands, and she smiled softly, reassuring herself that things would soon make sense. The two of them would be married, and the destruction of Kennedec would come to an end. Devane would begin rebuilding the city, and they would rule over their new kingdom together. Placing the crown on her dressing table, she stared at it for a moment, as though just seeing it gave her some sort of comfort. She returned to the task of drawing her hair back and clasping it into place neatly, before changing into a simple gray-colored gown with black trimming. Beginning to know her way about, Rachel passed swiftly through the halls until she was again out in the main chamber. Through the tunnels, she made her way to where she had left Atticus and Marcus last night. As she turned the corner, she found her two companions there, lying against the rock. Atticus was asleep against the wall of the cavern, but Marcus was awake and lifted his eyes to meet her as she approached. He was still sickly pale, and seemed to tremble even harder than he did yesterday. His eyes were glossy, and the skin around the wound on his arm had turned a ghastly color. An overwhelming sadness struck Rachel as she realized how much he was suffering. Rachel hurried across the tunnel and knelt beside him, putting the back of her hand to his forehead and realizing that his skin was burning. It was clear now. They had not been successful in draining the poison from his blood, and Marcus was fighting for his life against its effect. There would be no time to bring a medic from Callister, and they dared not try to make him walk on his own. He needed every bit of his strength to survive. Rachel knew that there was nothing that could be done but wait, but she could not help but feel responsible that Marcus had been hurt. He had been foolish to challenge the Dark Lord, even with the aid of the goddess's battle axe, but he had taken the risk for the sake of finding her, having no idea whether or not Rachel was in danger. She felt a surge of guilt and shame rush through her as she realized that Marcus may die because he had been trying to save her. She shook her head and gently took his hand from the rough cavern floor. "My dear friend, I am so sorry." She didn't know Marcus very well, but as children they had attended many of the same ceremonies and festivals. They had been forced to dance together at the annual galas in Kennedec as a symbol of peace between kingdoms, and they had learned each other's histories from the scribes and tutors. And now, he had ventured into the realm of the Dark Lord to save her, only to find out that she was now engaged to Devane. She wondered how hurt and betrayed he must feel, and she turned her head away from him. But his unsteady hand held hers more firmly as she turned away, making her look back at him. He was slowly shaking his head, struggling to make her understand. He wished that he could reason with her, but all that he wanted to say was in his eyes as he shook his head. She thought she could almost hear him saying to her, "Don't be sorry. I don't blame you for this. But please, forget this place. Forget Devane. Just stay here, with me." Rachel watched Marcus's eyes as he tried to make her understand. He wanted her to stay with them, to wait until he was well so they could escape this place together. When he had his strength back, he would help her. He would defeat the exiles and restore Kennedec for her people if that is all she wanted. Marcus knew that the Dark Lord was not to be trusted, no matter what was done to him or to his people. Devane was manipulating Rachel for some reason, even though he did not understand why. A voice beside them spoke up, and Rachel realized that Atticus was awake now, and he said, "He's very fond of you, you know. He wouldn't rest until we had found the staircase which led us down here. Not while he thought you could be in danger." Rachel looked back at Marcus when Atticus had finished speaking. The young King of Ghent was staring up at the ceiling of the cavern, and Rachel couldn't tell if it was pain or embarrassment that was making him look away. Atticus nodded softly. "I've known Marcus ever since I was 4, maybe 5 years of age, and he has been more of a brother to me than Salvador ever was. I know him very well, but I have never seen him so furious as when the gypsies told us that you had been taken here." "You should have seen him," Atticus said with a slight grin. Despite his pain, Marcus claimed one of the small stones off the cavern floor and launched it at Atticus. The stone bounced off the wall beside him, and Atticus smiled deviously and laughed aloud at his friend's attempt. But Rachel did not share in the laughter. Her guilt was so strong that she was feeling ill. Was Atticus trying to tell her that Marcus was in love with her? She banished the thought from her mind and stood up, drawing the attention of both of her companions, who looked up in surprise. "Please," she said, summoning a determined voice. "Please excuse me, I have things to attend to." And with that she darted away before they had a chance to protest. Marcus watched as Rachel hurried away from them, feeling a stab of pain in his chest as he wished he could run after her. Atticus sighed to himself as he rested his head back against the wall of the cavern. He had tried to make her understand, but now it was up to her. Rachel needed time to think, and she rushed away into the twisting caverns of Rekos, pushing further and further into the darkness, hoping to find some peace of mind, to find some reassurance that she was making the right decision. Rachel was slowly losing herself in the darkness, all the while searching desperately for a glimmer of light.